Welcome to Haunting History, the podcast that reaches back into the past for the events that shocked everyone. Tales of true crime, mystery, and the macabre. And when we're lucky, the stories where history and the people who lived it and the paranormal meet. Now, who doesn't live a good ghost story, right? Welcome back to Haunting History Podcast. This is your host, Kat. And joining me this week, my trusty sidekick as always, Haley.
Hi.
This week, what I want to do is go over, not necessarily catch you up to where we are, because I'm getting information every single day. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't find out something new. So I don't know that I can catch everybody up to exactly where we are, but I want to fix some things that we initially thought and go over some of the newer things that we've received since then. But before I do that, I wanted to say thank you to a couple people. Mary Bell with the Doe Network has been extremely helpful. You know who Mary Bell is, Haley?
Yeah, the one that gave us names.
She's the one. No, actually.
Oh.
She is a prospective match director for NamUs. So when people submit a missing person that matches someone that's listed in the Doe Network, a Jane or John Doe, she's the one who determines whether it is possibly that person. Like she explained a little bit of it in the last episode, but her job is to determine whether it's a viable match or not. And then the other person, I don't know if I even told you this, the person who gave us the case through Doe Network, it was given from one person to another who gave it to me. So I finally got to hear from the person who actually gave us the case. His name is Justin, and he emailed me and has been extremely helpful in kind of, I guess he and Mary are working sort of a sounding board for me, but Justin is far more proactive as far as sending me questions and asking me if I got this, if I got that. And he's been really helpful to kind of narrow down what I should be doing as opposed, because I feel like with a case like this, there's so many individual players, and then there's witnesses that I'm looking for, and then there's friends that I'm looking for, and people who were in the police statement, and then talking to the detectives and stuff. And Justin's been kind of really good about trying to get me to narrow down to certain things. So he's been really helpful. The other person who's been really helpful, and I'm not going to say his name on here because he hasn't said that I could, but he's a private investigator out of California, and he has been a private investigator since 1982. And before that he worked with, or he knew Rolf Parks from the Norco bank robbery. That's how I got in touch with him, was through Rolf. And he has been incredibly helpful. He can look up things that I can't. And he's the one who actually got me the case number on the probate file for John Kidwell. And I can't even describe how helpful he's been.
He's like kind of walking you through
what a private investigator would do. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He had helped me kind of determine what would have happened back in 1979 and what I should be doing now. Things that I hadn't really thought about. So he's been really, really helpful. I want to also mention one of our listeners, Catherine Reeder. She is a spiritualist. Her sign on her emails is spiritualist medium, and she's a card reader, and she offered to do readings for both of us. And I don't know if people believe in that. And to be quite frank, I don't know how much I believe in it, but I agreed to it because I'm fascinated by it. And she's such a nice person. She sounds like just so genuine. And she did a reading for me, and I won't go into it. And she actually did a reading for you. Yeah. Which is really, it has nothing to do with anything here, but she helped me to sort of focus a little bit, because she reminded me, and I don't know if this is a spiritualist thing or not, but she reminded me that I'm where I'm supposed to be. Like as frustrated as I get with this and all the people that I talk to and my sleepless nights, because my brain is just whirling, she kind of grounded me again and just reminded me that I'm on the path I'm supposed to be on, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be for whatever reason, whether it's the universe or I put myself here, it's where I'm supposed to be. So, I mean, it kind of
validated what you're doing.
It validated it, and it made me just kind of stop for a minute and breathe for a day, because I really haven't taken a day off since we started doing this case I think the first contact with Jocelyn, Debbie's niece, was way back in the beginning of May. And I haven't taken a minute or a day off of it. And after talking to Catherine, I took a day to like just kind of breathe and settle into it. And it was ridiculously helpful. And I don't know, maybe there was a reason for that, but we're going to have her, if anybody's interested, we're going to have Catherine's information and website on our episode page. If anybody is interested in that type of thing, even if you're not, she's very genuine and very sweet and just sort of a calming influence, I think. So we're going to have her on there. And I have I'm going to I don't want to rush through this because it's so important, but I do have some podcasts to thank. I had put feelers out for other podcasts that could help me get the story out, not for us, not for promotion purposes or not for publicity purposes, but I feel like the more people that know about this story, the more likelihood we are to find someone who's still alive. It wasn't that long ago. It was 40 years ago, that knows something. And so we have different genres in podcasting. And I feel like if other genres, not just true crime, that we might reach more people that way. And I've had podcasts writing me back and either playing our promo or talking about it on their page. And in exchange for that, I wanted to do the same for them. The first one who responded to me was Laughing in the Dark podcast. And I love this podcast. It's not just that they're doing our promo for us. I actually really like these podcasts. It's Laughing in the Dark podcast. Their website is Lit Dark Podcast. And it's a podcast out of Portland, Oregon by Sarah Jones, who's very sweet. And she hangs out in haunted places with comedians and they share laughter and terror. And they talk about their best ghost stories and learn the history of the haunted locations they're at. And she doesn't have a promo, so I don't have really anything to play, but she's getting one together and I want to play it later. But if you're interested in that podcast, it's really funny. It's called Laughing in the Dark Podcast and their website is darkpodcast.com. Thank you, Sarah. And then the other one is Critter Podcast, which cannot get any further from what we do. Hosts Cassie and Karina take you into a deep dive about amazing animals each episode, sharing info and love of critters big and small. And we do have their promo, so we're going to play it right here.
Hey Karina, do you want to hear an interesting new fact about sloths?
Impossible, Cassie. I know all there is to know about sloths. They spend their whole lives eating and sleeping, and that's living the dream in my book.
I bet you don't know this fact.
Fine, surprise me.
Sloths are surprisingly fast and skilled swimmers. They can move 3 times faster in water than they ever can on land.
Suddenly, I love them even more. Where can I possibly learn more exciting and interesting facts about sloths?
Well, we did do an entire episode on sloths for Crittercast.
Right! Crittercast, our comedic animal-themed podcast. It's the show where we talk about all kinds of animals and why we love them.
We upload new episodes twice a month on every second and fourth Sunday.
Just in time for your Monday morning commute. You can find Crittercast on iTunes, Spotify, and many other podcast streaming apps.
Plus, check out our website,
crittercastpodcast.com,
for links to all of our social media and for more fun facts and adorable photos of critters big and small.
Crittercast Podcast.
And it's really cute. Cassie was so sweet to write back to me, and their podcast has nothing to do with crime or anything like this, but they're still going to play our promo for us. So I wanted to say thank you to both of them. And then as we get into the story this week, what I want to do is kind of go over, because so far this season has been just one phone call after another. So I wanted to give more information on each of the individual people in the story. And so that there's no confusion as we go further and deeper into this, I'm just going to be referring to everybody first name wise. And this way I want to kind of make it clear who each individual person is. The missing people, and this is Debra Lynn Kidwell. Her maiden name is Cronin. So her name is Debra Lynn Cronin Kidwell. She goes by Debbie. She was born May 27th, 1952. And then her sons are Joshua John Kidwell and Jackson Dylan Kidwell. They were born March 13th, 1976. So Deborah Kidwell, Debbie, we're going to call her Debbie from now on, would be 66 years old currently. And Joshua and Jackson would be 43. Their father, Joshua and Jackson's father, and Debbie's husband was John Needham Kidwell, and he was born January 29th, 1949, and he is no longer living. And we'll get into that and what happened with that. They were married in Ernest, Pennsylvania, approximately 1974. I haven't found the exact date they were married because, again, it's almost too current to get information from Ancestry.com on that, but I did find a newspaper article from September of 1973, I think it was, of them getting their marriage license in Pennsylvania. The people that I'm talking to currently is Jocelyn, who is the niece of Debra, and she's the one that I've talked to the most. In fact, I talk to her every single day. And where we left off on the last episode, I had told Mary that we had found John's nephew, Tyler.
Yeah.
And I was really excited about that. We had found him through Ancestry.com. Jocelyn had set up her family tree, and she gave me the login. So like I kind of go between hers and mine all the time. And I had found I was on hers, and I had found the Kidwell family, and I didn't find John because he's listed as private, but because I had found out through newspaper articles and obituaries who his dad was, I was able to trace a family, find two. I found two family trees actually that belonged to the Kidwell family, and I messaged both of them. And I wish I had a recording of mine and Jocelyn's conversation that time, because she called me and said, check the messages on Ancestry. We heard back from one of them. And it's so weird because I think so much of this is about intuition. Like when you're looking for people, you kind of feel like you're with the right person or whatever. Like you have to do your due diligence and figure out like whether for a fact, but a lot of it is just instinctual, like you follow your gut reactions to certain things. And I had thought another woman was going to write me back. For some reason, I thought for sure she was the right person, and she's not the one that wrote me back. It was another woman who wrote me back and said that, well, her first line was something like, I tried to search your tree, but it wasn't coming up. So I looked you up on Facebook and found the Find Debra Lynn and Sons Facebook page. So she's like, now I know who you are and I know what you're looking for. My husband is John Needham, Kidwell's nephew. And I was super excited. And like I said, I wish I had the recording of Jocelyn calling me and telling me to check it, because my first reaction was to freak out that she was a stalker too. This lady, like she couldn't find the information. So she went and searched on Facebook and found.
Which is exactly what you do.
Right. I effing loved her, like right from the first like sentence was that basically that she stalked to figure out who Jocelyn was and like why she was writing to her on Ancestry. So I immediately fell in love with her. But she said that she explained to us that her husband was John's nephew. So
and this is Tyler.
And I haven't spoken to Tyler yet. So that's how we ended towards the end of the last episode. I was super excited that we had found John's family, because I wanted both sides. 40 years later, I think it's important that we have Debbie's side, and I really want to talk to someone on John's side of the family.
Yeah.
And so she gave us the email address, and I've been going back and forth on email with Tyler, and he has offered to let me interview him, and he was really excited to get to the bottom of it. But we had an appointment yesterday for me to call him and interview him, and it was a no-show. He didn't answer texts or phone calls or emails. So I don't know if he's changed his mind since then. I wanted to give him time. I really want to talk to John's brother. And I want to give Tyler time to maybe talk to his dad first and see if his dad will talk to us.
Is Tyler's dad, John's brother, the only other person you could talk to, or are there other people?
Well, he has a sister, and I haven't been able to find her yet. I know that I'll be able to find the brother. I have a couple leads on how to find him and get in touch with him. And
Tyler's brother or
Tyler's
John's
dad.
brother?
John's brother.
Okay.
Tyler's dad. And I would really, 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 of course, I would like to talk to Tyler. It was his uncle. And he is a couple years older than the twins. So he was born, I think, 3 years before the twins were. And so he'll have a lot of information about his uncle, like how he was after the disappearance. I mean, we won't know immediately following disappearance who's a little boy, but he knew his uncle all the way up until his uncle's death. So he would be able to give us some information. I'd really like to speak to John's brother, because it's really hard going into this 40 years later. And I want to make this really clear. The detectives from 1979 and the current detectives, and I will quote, well, we're not allowed to record our conversations with the detectives, So I can't really quote what they say, but I can say what was written down. And the quote from the current detective, after reading the file and going over everything, his summation, I guess, was, I believe the husband had a great deal to do with this. So I want to make it very clear the husband is definitely the prime suspect. What I don't know is why he was a prime suspect and why they didn't arrest him, or why they couldn't arrest him, or why they couldn't put, I mean, other than the detective has mentioned a couple times that their bodies were never found. So it's hard to have, especially back in 1979,
There's no crime without evidence in a body.
Right. And the detective has cited, like, during a couple of my conversations with him, other cases where they've tried someone and convicted someone without a body. So that's not really the problem. And to be honest, we haven't gotten a clear answer as to if the detectives back then thought that he was responsible, and the detectives in the following years, because there were at least three, I have at least 3 different names of detectives who have received the case since 1979, why he couldn't be arrested or why they couldn't pin it on him. I don't have that answer yet. So I guess talking to John's family, I can only guess or assume that they may not want to talk to me because of the fact that John was the prime suspect. I mean, I don't know how I would feel if one of my family members, I mean, I do know how I would feel. I mean, I believe I know how I'd feel. I would want to help the police in any way that I could, even if it was 40 years later. But I don't know that everyone else feels that way. So I have not spoken to the nephew yet, other than a few emails back and forth. And I have not spoken to John's brother yet, which I would really like to talk to.
So most of your contact is just Debbie's side.
Yes, most of my information has come from Debbie's side. And as far as John's side, it's only been emails back and forth with the nephew so far.
So do they not know if the information that you've gotten from the detective? They don't know any of that stuff?
John's family knows very little. I haven't given them a ton of information because I was waiting to have a conversation with them. And I sort of have been putting out feelers and asked Tyler directly, like, if we find out that your uncle had everything to do with their disappearance, how is that going to make you feel? Like, are you okay with that?
Like, are you okay with opening this box and whatever happens, like, you're going to be fine?
Yeah, like, you're going to be all right. I'm going to tell the story. No matter what I do, I'm going to tell the story. I'm trying to help a family heal, or at least get some kind of answers, or at least be able to put it to rest with all the knowledge that they can have. And I told him that, and I said, in one of my emails, I said, are you going to be okay with that? Like, if you help me out and tell the story and tell me what about John and his life, are you going to be okay with, at the end, we come to the same conclusions as the detectives? And he said, yeah, they just want the truth, is what he said. But then he backed off. But then, yeah, I haven't heard from him in 72 hours, so I don't really know. I don't know. I don't know how I would feel in that same position. But I would like to hear John's family's side of the story. He did mention that he believed that they hired a private investigator at some point. But I haven't even gotten a straight answer as to whether they hired the private investigator to find Debbie and the boys, or if they hired a private investigator to clear John's name, which would be 2 very different things.
Or when he was hired. If it was like right after, years later.
Right. That's the other thing that I haven't gotten an answer for yet. In the meantime, though, this is the good news. In the meantime, we had written a couple of emails back and forth to the detectives. Like I said, with the original detective, I had something like 32 emails going back and forth. And he had told me that he believed he would be able to give more information to the family as opposed to media. He called me media. Fine. I'm fine with that. But so Jocelyn kind of stepped in and has been talking to, weirdly enough, she's not even talking to the detective anymore. She's talking to his boss, the sergeant above him, who has been extremely helpful. They went from being not helpful at all to basically reading the police file. They're never going to hand us the police file, unfortunately, because it's considered active and ongoing. And it went from, the original case was a missing persons case. and that changed to the major crimes unit, which is robbery and homicide. So they believe that. They believe that they're dead. They believe that they're deceased. The police believe
All
that.
three of them.
Yeah, or they wouldn't have moved it to robbery and homicide. They're special crimes. They would have left it as a missing persons file. But it's not considered missing persons anymore. And during one of the conversations, luckily Jocelyn, she gets to talk to the detective more because, like the original detective had said, they're more inclined to give her information than give me information, although they've been really kind to me also. He reiterated to her that it was moved from missing persons to major crimes. And that he too, like I read his quote, he too believes that John had everything to do with the disappearance.
So do we get to talk about what conversation the detectives and Jocelyn had?
Yeah. In fact, Jocelyn takes really excellent notes. And this is the most important thing that we have found out since we started working with the detectives, and they've been more forthcoming. Because Jocelyn, I don't think I told you this, was willing to fly, and still is willing to fly to California if they were to give us the actual case file, which they're never going to do. But there is 75 pages that are digitized. And that includes all the original missing persons file, the initial investigation, and the initial missing persons report. So the first thing that, the first conversation that Jocelyn had with them, the first thing that was brought up was the car. And in my conversation with the original detective, and then this conversation Jocelyn had, the sergeant was going over with her that the car was found at LAX airport.
The car as in Debbie's car.
Well, hold on. This is how they're telling us the story. They're basically reading the report and telling us the story. And this is what the original detective did with me, was that the car was found at LAX airport, and he expanded on that and said the doors, the hood, and the trunk were all standing open, which is what alerted the LAX police to contact the police. So we've been working on that. I mean, that the car was found at the airport. Come to find out, probably 2 to 3 conversations in with this sergeant, that Detective Cadman and the sergeant were both confusing a different case. And the car was never found at the airport. That the story was that John, and this is the same story that Debbie's family knew and John's family knew, that in fact, I'll tell you the original missing persons report was that they were last seen at LAX because John drove Debbie and the 2 boys to LAX, pulled up to the Continental Airlines door, dropped them off, and he waited in the car and watched them get in line for Continental Airlines. And then he drove away because he was double parked. He never got out of the car. So the story that Debbie's family knew and the story that John's family knew is completely accurate.
So the confusion about the car was not confusion at all, except for the fact that they were thinking of a different case.
They were thinking of a different case.
So that whole thing is thrown out. Everyone is actually on the same page about
Everyone's
the car.
actually on the same page about the car, which was really frustrating for us because we probably spent a good week and a half kind of tracing down the car, figuring out like her leaving at the airport, and if John's initial missing persons report was conflicting with the actual information the police had.
Yeah.
And it's not.
Yeah.
And then that's where I go back to wanting to talk to John's family again, because I feel like so much of the history and so much of the conversations were geared towards the husband doing it, not necessarily what really, really, truly happened. And what really happened was he read the official report, and it was taken on May 5th, 1979. John last saw them at 2300 hours at LAX. He had gotten a phone call that day at work from Debra. Debra said, "My mom is really sick in Pennsylvania. I need to fly to her." So John went to the bank, pulled out $450, gave her $450 cash, which would have been more than enough to buy the plane tickets to Pennsylvania and back in 1979, and gave her a blank check, and then dropped them off at the airport, watched them walk in, drove away. The next day, this is all from the very original missing persons report. The next day, May 5th, around noon, he called Debbie's parents. Now, the original story was that Debbie's mom, and you can hear it in the recording from the sister, and the stories passed down, that the grandmother answered the phone, that Ann Cronin answered the phone, which is Debbie's mom, Jocelyn's grandmother. answered the phone, and John said, "Let me speak to Debbie." From what the police report says, that's not what happened. When John called the Cronin house, he spoke to Debbie's father and said, "Can I speak to Debbie?" And the father said, "She's not here." And John said, "She is. I dropped her off at the airport last night. She was coming to see Anne because she said Anne was deathly ill." And he said, "No, she's not. And Debbie and the boys are not here." John hung up the phone and called the police and reported them missing right then and there.
And that story is...
That's the official statements.
But like just from John? Or
just from John.
The dad is saying, yeah, he did call me. That conversation happened.
Well, no, the dad is long gone. Debbie's father passed away years ago.
No, like the police didn't get a statement from Debbie's dad?
We don't have that. They don't have that.
Oh.
So the next thing...
all we have is what John said happens.
And it's conflicting with what Jocelyn's family has always said, was that Debbie's mom answered the phone and John didn't say, "Oh, wait, why are you answering the phone? I thought you were on your deathbed." Like that was always like a contention with them. Like if John really believed that she was sick, why did he just start chatting with her and not be like, "I thought you were on your deathbed. I thought that's why my wife had to go there." And from the official police report, he didn't even talk to Debbie's mom. The initial conversation was with Debra's dad. And Debra's dad explained they weren't there and that Anne was not sick.
So I guess I'm just kind of confused and feel like the detectives dropped the ball, because why would they just take a statement from John and not be like, well, let's make sure he actually did call the dad and have this conversation? Well, like that seems weird to me that they wouldn't check his story out. There's two things you can look at. First of all, the current detective has made it clear that they did things quite a bit differently back in 1979 than they would do currently. And secondly, I believe that originally when they took the missing persons report, they didn't take it seriously like she was gone, like deceased or anything. They took it more like a wife who ran away. Well, because, that's how John makes it seem. But I feel like they should have looked at it and been like, is he making it seem this way on purpose so we don't look for bodies, or did it really happen? Right, except that John is saying that she was rushing back to her mom. Her mom was on her deathbed. And then when he files the case with the police, he says exactly what happened. He says that he called, well, I don't know about dropping them off at the airport. It's not exactly what happened, but he did call the Cronin house and find out she wasn't there. So I don't know that in the first conversation, he led them to believe that she was a runaway wife. I think in the first conversation, I think they took it that way, that she was a runaway wife. I don't think they suspected him right off the bat, is what I'm saying. And as far as calling and confirming what had happened, the next thing that happened was, and this is another thing that sent us into another tailspin, because here I am, like the initial conversation, when I find out that it wasn't Anne Cronin that he originally spoke to after all the family folklore of how he didn't ask, like, how are you answering the phone when you're on your deathbed thing. When I find out that it wasn't even Anne who answered the phone initially, it was the father who answered the phone initially, my brain starts going, okay, like we're framing this guy right from the very beginning. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, well, why isn't he asking why you're answering the phone? Like, you're so sick, you can answer the phone. Like, I don't want to jump to conclusions that this man actually did anything. So I'm like, okay, the police report is saying it wasn't even her that answered the phone. So that's just more folklore that's passed down through the family, the game of telephone. That wasn't actually accurate information. But then Anne, immediately after the missing persons report is filed, Anne called the police directly and told the police, look, my son-in-law called and said that my daughter is missing, but nowhere during our conversation, which wasn't a conversation with her, it was with her husband, did he mention anything about the boys? Like, where are the boys at? So I guess that first initial phone call when he called the grandparents it was about Debbie, but he wasn't mentioning what happened to the boys. And then she told the police, here's the deal. I don't think my son-in-law is telling the truth. He's spent time in prison. So she suspects him off the bat. Immediately suspects that John had something to do with them and that the whole phone call was a ruse. Yeah. He's just trying to cover up something.
Right. She's immediately suspicious right off the bat that John is calling and saying that they're missing. And she tells the detective that he went to prison at some point. And the current detective made it clear to Jocelyn that he hadn't confirmed any of that he didn't know for a fact that John had been to prison or what he had been to prison for. But I did. And that was a ton of work. I mean, I can't tell you how many phone calls I made because, again, 1979 is such a weird time period. It's not old to be considered historical, and it's not current enough to be digitized. But for some reason, this is so strange. She mentions that he had done time in prison at CRC. Do you know what CRC is?
No, I don't know.
And she had specifically mentioned the location of that he was at CRC, which is one of the California state prisons. CRC happens to be within spitting distance of us right now. He was from Los Angeles, Ventura County, and they sent him to literally right down the street from where we sit right this moment.
Oh, weird.
It's such another parallel to my life that this story always keeps bumping into my life. But what I did find, weirdly enough, is I had gone through probably like 8 people to try and find his prison file because I wanted to know if he had been in prison for anything violent. But CRC is California Rehabilitation Center, which leads you to believe that it's most likely something to do with drugs. And Debra's mom, and we'll find out later as we go along, her mom, Anne, mentioned several times that she believes that John was using drugs on and off throughout the 1970s. And I found his police record. The weird thing about it is that by like the 8th person I spoke to said that there was a group of files on site there, the state archives, from random years that they were still looking to digitize or file away. They didn't know, I guess, what they were going to do with them yet. And so there's not very many here. It's not likely that he's part of them, but let me see what I can do. And then a couple of days later, she calls me back, and weirdly enough, his file was in that pile of files sitting there waiting to be digitized or filed, which is so strange that it would, like the randomness of it being his file being there. And they can't share the majority of his file. Like they can't share who visited him. They can't share any psychological treatment that he got while he was there. Because there's a ton of stuff that they can't tell me, but they can tell me that it was a narcotics charge, that it wasn't a domestic violence or anything like that. It had something to do with drugs. And that in 1979, what would be considered a felony that would put him in prison would now be considered a misdemeanor.
Oh, okay.
So it wasn't anything.
Did you say how long he served?
Well, that's the problem. Reading the file, it was 1970. He was sentenced and convicted in 1970 on a narcotics charge, and I can't get any more information other than it was a narcotics charge. And then it looks like he got out and then went back. But I think he got out in 1974, and he was married in 1974. He went back to Pennsylvania after that.
So he got out and got married to Debbie?
Yeah, but I think he did 4 years. I'm pretty sure. So it's hard to say what the seriousness is of his conviction because, again, they can't tell me. It's not public record until 2058. It'll be considered public record.
I can't believe it's that long.
It's 50 years after the person has passed away. So then the second thing, we had to clarify the car, to clarify that the phone call. So with my thing, I keep going back and forth. Like some things are not true, so I don't want to pin it on John. And then something happens like his prison record. Like, okay, well, maybe you want to go back to it being John again. And then something else will happen that's the hard part about this. But I want to go back to when Jocelyn initially talked to the police department with the detective, and he started to give her the information. He wanted to be clear that the case was classified as still missing, and that they're not declared deceased as far as the police go. But it looks like John divorced her in 1993. He didn't have her declared deceased, but he did divorce her in 1993. Because since then I've got the probate records, and the probate records list him as being deceased. So I'm not certain how you divorce someone who, I guess it's considered abandonment after so many years.
I was going to say, don't you have to have like the other half agree on the divorce? Like, how does that happen?
I think because she ran off, I think at some point you can get a divorce based on someone being gone.
Right.
But I don't know how, and we mentioned in the very first episode that there was a life insurance policy, and the police confirmed that there was a life insurance policy taken out on Debra in February of 1979. So 2 months before she went missing, there was a life insurance policy that was taken out. I can't find any record of John getting that money. He wouldn't have gotten it at least for 7 years, the way that insurance works. He wouldn't have gotten it for at least 7 years after she disappeared. And then on top of that, he didn't divorce her until 14 years after she disappeared. So if he divorced her, he wouldn't be entitled to the money either.
But you can't find that he got it after 7 years anyway.
I can't find that he got the money. There's no case files or anything. It would have had to have gone through the courts for sure, because there's no death record.
Yeah.
And to collect a life insurance policy, you have to have a death record. So I don't show that he collected on her insurance policy at all, which again, then flips me to the other side again. Like, he didn't kill her for life insurance. He never took it. And if he divorced her in 1993, that makes it null and void that he would ever be entitled to her life insurance policy. Right?
Yeah. I mean, or he banked on them finding a body and not pinning it on him, and then he would have gotten it, and that just didn't happen. So then he couldn't get the money. Like, it could have just been like an oopsie, you know?
Yeah, but he could have, after a certain amount of time, you can declare someone deceased. People do it all the time.
Really?
After a certain, yeah, absolutely. People do it all the time for insurance policies. They declare someone who goes missing deceased, where they have to go through a courthouse to do it, but they get, the judge will say, okay, presumed dead.
So he didn't try hard enough to
It doesn't look like he tried at all.
Got it.
And then the other thing is, we bring up in the last episode too, is that Debra's fingerprints are on file. And I want to clear this up because I think this is really important. And Mary Bell and I were talking about the only reason that a woman would have, or a person would have their fingerprints done in 1979 is for nefarious reasons, like she was arrested or went to jail. Come to find out, she was a nurse.
So what does that mean? As a nurse, you have to get your fingers?
Yeah, for your licensing, you have to have a fingerprints done. And talking to Debra's sisters, neither one of them mentioned that she was a waitress and an artist, but nowhere do they mention that she was a nurse. So she was a nurse. One of the witnesses that is in the police file worked with her at Santa Monica Hospital. So that's why her fingerprints were done, was because she at one time was a nurse. She had quit 4 years prior to her disappearance and went to work as a waitress.
Weird.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the other big thing that I want to clarify is we talk a lot about a nervous condition and it being epilepsy. I think this is important information, is that they spoke to her doctor. Her doctor was a Dr. Jacobs. Now this again is all from the police file. Her doctor is Dr. Jacobs. In her prescription, she was on very heavy drugs for her epilepsy. She was taking Dilantin and phenobarbital. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but it's phenobarbital and Dilantin, which are very strong drugs. And I actually looked up what could happen with these drugs, and it can cause changes in mental status, behavioral problems, and even dementia. But the thing is when they spoke to her doctor made it very, very clear that she was not faithful to either her doctor's appointments or taking her meds.
Interesting.
And when I don't know how that affects you if you're going on and off those kind of drugs. I mean,
I assume it affects you a lot.
It would make you kind of a mess. And I guess in the police file too, she had a grand mal seizure in January that left her depressed and upset for something like 3 weeks.
The January before she went missing.
Kind of messed with her a little bit for a while. They do know that the police had checked and said that the last time she filled her prescription was December 18th, 1978. So 6 months before she went missing. But I don't know how much, again, she did not take her medicine faithfully, and she didn't, so I don't know how much they gave her. Like the police file doesn't say they gave her a year's prescription's worth or 6 months or 3 months or whatever. And I guess it wouldn't matter anyways, because if she wasn't faithfully taking it, she could have half a bottle left come May if she didn't take it the way she was supposed to.
And there's no record saying that she took these pills on this trip.
They were nowhere to be found when they did the search of the apartment. Her medication was not there.
So either she ran out because they didn't give her a lot, or
she took it with
took them with her.
Right. We don't know yet. The other thing that I wanted to clear up too is that as far as John seeing them in line at Continental Airlines, on May 14th, which was 10 days after they went missing, the police confirmed with Continental Airlines that Debbie or the boys were not on any of the Continental Airline flights that night to Pennsylvania. What they don't clarify, though, that I kind of want to clarify, is that there was even a flight that night. We still don't know. They do know that the check that John gave her, or he says he gave her, allegedly, never was cashed. That the only cash she would have had was $450.
And there was no way to trace that he ever spent the $450.
Well, there's actually no way to even know. The police looked at his bank statements, and all it says, and again, this is 40 years later, is no major purchases, nothing that seems like suspicious. But they don't confirm that whether or not he took out the $450. But this is what Joss and I were talking about. Like, when did he pull out that $450? It wasn't 11 o'clock at night when he took him to the airport. There weren't ATM machines back in 1979. But did he do it when she told him at lunch that she had, and I'm confused about where I'm getting the phone call that she called him at work and said that she had to go. But somewhere during one of the conversations, it's mentioned in one of the notes that, or Jocelyn told me, I don't remember, because again, we can't record our conversations with the sheriff's department. So everything has to be, luckily Jocelyn takes such good notes. I'm not as good as she is, but somewhere I'd read that she had called him at work. So he could have left work and pulled out that money before even going home from work.
But there's no record of that, or the police just don't say that there is.
The police don't say that there is. So that's, again, the detective now says that this is so differently investigated than it would be in current day.
Yeah.
So those are all the things that we had mentioned in the first couple of episodes that were not accurate, as far as what we're learning as we go along. And to get the police file, it's literally been 6 conversations so far. Just to get a 75-page report has been 6 conversations, and they've made it clear to us that they have to work on current cases. So they're going to give us one more chance. So we get to write a list of questions and ask one more time, and they're going to go through the file. The only other thing that we'll probably get from the police file, which I think that we've gotten a lot, and we'll find out as we go through the episodes, and I kind of get everything in a more sensible order, that she had a diary. And that it's a great contention in the police report about her diary. And John gave the police her diary and her address book. And in her diary, she writes a lot about John and the boys, all in positive. Everything's positive that she writes about John and the boys. And she writes a lot. Like it's not little tiny paragraphs or sentences. Every time she writes in her journal, she writes a lot, except for the last 3 days before she went missing. And those are all just 1-sentence entries, which bothered the crap out of the detectives. Like, they mentioned a lot in the police report, but they don't mention what's written in the diaries. So,
do you know if her diary is kept as evidence anywhere?
Well, that's what we believe it's in, or the detective believes that it's in the archives, which is in a different location than where the detective works. So last Wednesday, we were supposed to get a copy of it. They'll never give the diary away. It's going to stay in evidence.
Right.
But they're saying now that they can have someone photocopy it and give it to Jocelyn's family, because that's fair. That's
her
family,
property.
Have every right to that information. So we're still waiting for that.
That'll be interesting.
It's supposed to be Wednesday. Yeah, so much so that the last 3 entries bothered the detectives so much so that they mentioned that they're going to have the handwriting analyzed. But then there's to see if it was her, because it bothered them so very much. And that's what kind of trips me out too, is like, almost in the police report, it's almost like they're blaming John. Like, John wrote the last 3 entries. And to me, I hate to be devil's advocate, but if she was taking these serious drugs and she wasn't taking them regularly and it did affect her mental state, wouldn't it affect how you write too?
I guess, yeah.
I don't know. So that's another thing. And then, the last thing I want to mention is that it is confirmed that John committed suicide in 2008.
Okay.
He shot himself in his house. And there's so much more to that story. He did leave a suicide note. And
are we going to be able to talk about that in the next episode?
we will be talking about the suicide note in the next episode. And we will be talking about the other extenuating circumstances when he killed himself, and why I keep changing my mind so much. Because one minute I'm convinced that this poor man lost his wife and kids and lived his life wondering where they were. And then in the next minute, I'm like, oh, he did it. Like, he did it, and we'll never find their bodies, and we'll never find them, and we'll never know what happened.
Yeah.
We still don't know what happened to Debbie, Joshua, or Jackson. We have small reasons to believe that maybe Joshua and Jackson, or even Debra, may still be alive. If that's the case, then they may still be out there. To believe that, you have to believe against what all the detectives believe, and that is that John had nothing to do with their disappearance. If they survived past the night of May 4th, 1979, the boys would currently be 43 years old and Debbie would be 67. Please help us by sharing this podcast and like and share the Facebook page, Find Debra, Lynn, Kidwell, and Sons. We do believe that someone somewhere knows something. Please help us find that someone. Thank you for listening to this episode of Haunting History Podcast. Be sure to like, follow, and comment on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Haunting History Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to all your favorites. Visit our website at hauntinghistorypodcast.com for more information on each episode. Until next time, I'm Kat, and remember, the living are far scarier than any ghost.